Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelou, the founder of the Transparency Task Force. The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise. That means we exist to make an impact as opposed to existing to make money. We are an international organization. We have approximately 4,000 members now around the world, roughly 3,000 in the UK, the rest across Europe, USA, Canada, South Africa, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia too. TTF is really growing. It's growing despite the fact that we have got very little resource to enable us to grow. The reason why we are growing is because we are doing something which we believe to be extremely worthwhile. Essentially, the idea is that we want to promote ongoing reform of the financial services sector so that it serves society better. Our session tonight, as you all know, is about fixing financial services with authentic communications. And quite frankly, and quite literally, there is a very specific objective in mind. And we're going to be producing a guide to best practice on how the financial services industry needs to and could go about communicating in a more authentic way. And the reason we want to do that is because it's becoming increasingly, increasingly clear to me and many other people that the financial services sector really does have a weakness when it comes to communicating in an authentic way. So I'm going to kind of elaborate a little bit on this idea of producing a guide, and then we'll be going quite shortly to our first speaker, Donna Bradshaw. So the guide is effectively going to be something like this. This is a white paper we wrote about 2-3 years ago. It's all about transparency requirements in the banking sector. Not particularly thick, you can see it's not that many pages, but it very succinctly gets the message across that the banking sector needs to be far more transparent in terms of how they charge customers who fall into overdraft. And we presented that white paper to a large room of important people in the House of Commons, including key people at the regulators, so on, so forth. And we'd like to think that the thought leadership within that white paper resulted in some of the changes that subsequently occurred as a result of the FCA deciding to act in this particular space. So that's one white paper that we've already produced. The second I'm going to show you is a little bit thicker, not that much thicker. It's a white paper we produced a couple of years ago. As you can see, the title is "How Can We Accelerate the Rebuilding of Trust and Confidence in Financial Services?" This white paper speaks to the idea that there is a major trust deficit within the financial services industry. It articulates the idea that that's very bad for consumers. It's also bad for regulators, for politicians, and of course for the financial services industry itself. And that particular white paper, over a period of time, grew into this, our book entitled "Why We Must Rebuild Trustworthiness and Confidence in Financial Services," and how we can do it. I'm going to carry on talking a little bit about the book for reasons that will become quite clear. And don't misunderstand me. I'm not suggesting for a moment that the white paper on authentic comms is going to evolve into a book. It's not. It's too niche a subject, but it most certainly could be the basis of an incredibly important white paper discussion document, similar to the other two that I've already shown you. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the book, because there's a bit in our book that relates to this particular topic we're talking about tonight. So I hope this is all making a bit of sense to you all. Here's the web page of all about our book. And I'm going to focus on the bit in our book about communications. Communications is one of the 12 finance development goals. I'll briefly explain what we mean by the finance development goals. The finance development goals is a framework for reform of the financial industry. Many brains, much bigger and better than mine around the world, helped us to develop and craft and cultivate the 12 finance development goals. The idea itself came as a result of a meeting I had in New York with Georg Kell. Georg Kell was the man who conceived and created the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We had what was for me a very, very memorable meeting in New York, opposite Central Station, coffee, bagels. We were meant to be speaking for about 20 minutes. It ended up going on a lot longer than that. We kind of sparked a little bit off each other. It was one of those very, very memorable meetings. And Georg explained to me how he kind of conceived and created the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for planetary reform. And I came away with that from that meeting with the idea, why don't we try to create a framework for financial reform? And that's what led to the 12 Finance Development Goals. They cover topics such as purposefulness and technology, protecting consumers from harm, better risk management, better governance, product design, financial stability, virtuous leadership, responsible reward, transparency, and cultural reform. These are the 12 topics that we believe are the underlying drivers of the behavior within the financial industry, behavior that we massively want to change. And as you can see, each one of these finance development goals has got a little bit of a narrative around it. So I'm just going to highlight that bit of text there, and I'm going to read it out because it's pretty small. You may not all be able to read it well. It says, it's simply not possible for people to readily trust that which they do not understand. I'm going to repeat that line. It's simply not possible for people to readily trust that which they do not understand. We're making the point here that people can't trust something if they don't understand it. We then go on to say that that harsh reality should give us some clues about the importance of communicating in a clear, authentic, and helpful manner. However, if there's one thing that the financial services sector is particularly poor at, it's comms. We know that because the financial services industry is the least trusted of all sectors. And this is the key point, ladies and gentlemen. There is a mountain of evidence from many different sources. For example, the Edelman Trust Barometer, for example, Violation Tracker, a mountain of evidence, lots of academic journals covering this topic as well, that shows the financial services industry isn't trusted. And that's a problem. It's a problem for the industry. How can the financial sector, which is built on the very notion that it can be trusted, how can it be allowed to operate in such an untrusted state? The word credit comes from the Latin word credere, which means believe in. If you look into the history of the financial industry, you'll quickly come to the conclusion that it's a man-made construct. You know, we've invented it. It's not a natural industry like agriculture, for example. It's a man-made industry created off the back of the idea that it can be believed in. So our view at the Transparency Task Force is very simple. It is not acceptable for the financial industry, which has a profoundly important impact on society, both good and bad. It's not acceptable for it to be so poorly trusted. And there are reasons for that. It's not some bit of bad luck. It's not an accident. There are reasons why the financial industry isn't trusted. And those reasons are many and complicated. And I now spend my entire life thinking about those sorts of things. And without a doubt, as you'll be hearing from our speakers tonight, part of the problem is that the financial industry communicates in a way that people are finding increasingly difficult to engage with and buy into. That's why this is such an important topic. That's why what we're doing tonight is hearing the ideas of the speakers and everybody else around this topic of what's it going to take for the financial industry to communicate in a more authentic way. We then want to recruit volunteers. Here I am being very transparent. We want to recruit volunteers who are going to work with me and the TTF and each other to produce a guide similar to this, but all about authentic comms. It will effectively be a guide to best practice on how to communicate authentically in the financial industry. There'll be a bit in the guide that will be all about the problem statement, i.e., here's the evidence showing that the financial industry isn't trusted. Here's the part that we believe non-authentic communications plays in that. There'll be a series of ideas, some conclusions, and then the very, very important bit is the call to action at the end. And the call to action at the end is frankly to encourage the regulators to revisit this idea of ensuring the financial industry communicates in a more authentic way. Now, I do hope that's set the scene quite nicely. Please do think of this event, if you want to call it that, as a meeting of like-minded people. Hopefully we'll have some great thoughts and ideas shared by the speakers, but everybody else as well. And then the key question throughout the whole of this is, are you as an individual happy to be one of the volunteers who'll be working together to put the guide together and to make it actually happen? There's no massive rush for this. We're not under any time pressure. We've got so little bandwidth. We need to kind of squeeze it in amongst many other things that we're currently doing. But I reckon if we were to produce an output, say Q1 next year, a very well thought through document that captures the message around communicating authentically, then that would be great. So we're not going to be doing loads of work. We're going to be doing a little bit of work over a longish period of time. Q1 next year is when I'm hoping this guide can be produced, and we'll use the guide to convene subsequent conversations with regulators, policymakers, parliamentarians, and all the rest of it. So I'll cover off a few kind of housekeeping rules. Please feel free to use the chat. Anything that goes in the chat will be circulated as notes for everybody that booked onto the session. I'm repeating myself, I know, but the session is being recorded, so we'll get it out on social media. We'll edit it over the next couple of days. Of course, also use the chat to freely exchange ideas, contact details, so on and so forth. Before we go to our very first speaker, can I just check in with everybody to very quickly, and I literally mean 20 seconds, no more than that. I just want everybody to have a chance to introduce themselves. So all I want to know is who you are, the organization you're with, what you do, where you are, and very briefly, why this topic of authentic communications is of interest to you. And then what we do in about 4 or 5 minutes, if you can get through this bit quite quickly, please, is we'll pass over to Donna Bradshaw, who's the founder of Value Limited, to share her thoughts, so very experience-based and insight-based thoughts on this topic of communications. So I hope that sets the scene nicely. Mr. Ian Veach, can you please go first, sir, with your very brief as it can be, introduction. Thanks, Ian.
Right, Ian Veach. I'm semi-retired, semi-consultant, having been in life assurance most of my working life, product development, and director of marketing at one point. So communications around products and the regular fights between compliance and regulators for what we should tell and what we need to tell has been my life for a long time. And I'd love if we could try to make things a bit simpler.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Veach. Lovely to have you with us. Ian's doing loads of voluntary work for TTF. He's leading a massively important project about the VIP mind maps around the world. Thanks, Ian. Michaela, could I please invite you to, as succinctly as possible, introduce yourself? Thank you.
Oh, hello. Well, I wear many hats and I worked mainly, so I'm theoretical physicist turned finance person. So I guess that's all for now.
Wonderful. And you're in Canada?
Toronto, Canada. Yeah.
Toronto, Canada. Thank you very much. Ian, remind me, where are you? Take yourself off mute, Ian.
I am in Dublin, Ireland.
Dublin, Ireland. Thank you very much. Let's go to Mr. Steve Johnson next, please.
Good afternoon. I'm partly here to support my boss, actually, Christopher Taylor, who's speaking later. So I work for Tempo also, but I'm also interestingly based in Dublin. And I've only recently joined Tempo. I'm 30 years man and boy financial services, mainly promoting products to advisors in the UK and beyond. I believe in this passionately. I think it's very important our industry ups its game as far as being transparent and communicating in a sensible and easy to understand fashion.
Thanks, Steve. Very well put, sir. Thank you very much. Let's go to Teresa Hara, and then we're going to go to Sue Lewis, then Ian Beeston. Teresa, please take yourself off mute and tell us a little bit about yourself. Keep it as short as you can. Thank you.
Hi. Thanks for organizing the event. I'm a researcher actually working on trust issues in finance.
Wow.
So yeah, as brief as it gets, I guess.
That was beautifully brief, Teresa. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, we'll hook up after because I want to know all about your research. It aligns very well with what we're doing. So we'll fix up a call.
Sure.
Thank you very much. We go from Teresa to Sue Lewis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Lewis, all-purpose consumer advocate and general nuisance. I'm really interested in communications because in my work, particularly at the Financial Services Consumer Panel, we came up again and again against the legal barriers to propagate. And I just think some of those legal regulatory barriers really need examination.
Thank you very much, Sue. Sue Lewis is a Swiss Army knife of consumer advocacy. She's been there, done it. Wonderful. Thanks, Sue. Mr. Ian Beeston, then we'll go to Stefan, then to Kim.
Good evening. My name is Ian Beeston. I'm a co-founder of Money Alive, and we produce video box sets on different financial topics for advisors and pension schemes to use in order to educate their clients and their members about the financial topics. And we write them impartially, so we have no skin in the game, and that's one of the reasons I think they're valued by our customers and their clients.
And I really like the work that Ian does. Ian, feel free to put a link into your work in the chat if you'd like to. It's a great way to get some very important messages across, especially in relation to risks associated with things like pension transfers, etc. Great to have you with us, Ian, as always. Let's now go to Mr. Chris Taylor, please.
Hi, Andy. Hi, everybody. So very pleased to be here. My background quickly is sort of 30 years in the asset management industry, working with providers. I was also a private client advisor before that, so dealing with clients directly. I did a decade at the big shop, HSBC Asset Management, 96 to 06, started my own small company in 07. In the finance industry a year before the financial crisis, obviously, which was a good time to start a business. So I've done the big shops, I've done the small shops, and I've moved on from that along the way and started the company that I currently head about 5 years ago. And one of the things that we've made our mantra is, as you'll see when I present, doing the right things and doing simple well. And one of those things is championing the use of plain English. So the subject matter was really of interest to me. I've got some quite strong views on how it can be achieved, partly because I've learned how it can be achieved. I've done it. So we're at the forefront of it. And you'll see when I present a little bit more about that. And I can't see any excuse whatsoever for this not being doable and solvable.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Very well said, sir. If I can invite you, Chris, if you can, to move your mouthpiece, the microphone, about roughly ½ an inch, ¾ of an inch away from your face, because you're nice and loud, but a little bit fluffy. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Loud and fluffy. Let's go to Mr. Philip Meadowcroft, and then to Michael Dodd, then to Anne-Marie Borg. Philip.
Good evening, everybody. As you can see, I'm long past my working life sell-by date because I can't unmute myself promptly. I am chairman of our family company's pension scheme, our self-administered scheme, and I have no financial background other than that. And my interests are particularly in corporate governance and corporate communications, the like of which I've seen some pretty dreadful examples over the last 30 years.
Thank you, Philip. Mr. Michael Dodd.
Good evening, all. Nice to be invited here by Philip. And I help people across all sectors to give great answers to tough questions and to communicate better. So working across all the sectors, I can confirm, Andy, that you're kind of right. The financial services are not great at talking in easy to understand English and other languages and giving great answers that are simple and easy to follow. So I'm very interested to hear how you plan to tackle this, because it goes beyond just one simple session that I can do with business leaders. There is something cultural that you do need to attack in financial services. So well done for taking on the challenge.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Anne-Marie Borg, then we'll go to Graham Headley, then to Knut Rostad. Anne-Marie.
Good evening. Yes, I'm an ex-lawyer turned artist and a performer and also educator. I deal with ocean preservation and the change and reformatting of the education system through a project that I created, which is called the Antara Project. And it focuses mainly on how to communicate. That's my main kind of focus. Voila.
Voila. Merci beaucoup, Anne-Marie. Super stuff. Mr. Graham Headley.
Thank you. I'm Graham Headley. I'm a freelance company secretary. Don't think I can hold a candle to anybody on this call. I have a general interest in compliance and governance, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you, Graham. If you have an interest in governance, then come to our session tomorrow night, all about the question. Well, the topic is the case for radical reform of the audit profession. Same time tomorrow. Let me know if you want to come along. Thanks, Graham. Let's go to Knut, and then we'll go to Robin Harries.
Thank you, Andy. I am Knut Rostad, president of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard here in Washington, comma, please don't hold that against me, comma. I run a group that's been around for 10 years to promote fiduciary duties in financial advice and investment management. And what I will be talking about shortly is what's real life happening with the major regulator here in Washington right now. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Knut. That's everybody apart from our first speaker. So I very deliberately left Donna to the very, very end. Oh, forgive me, I've missed Kim. How can I miss Kim?
Stefan?
Oh, Kim and Stefan. I've missed two people. Sorry, I can't see everybody's screens. Let's go to Stefan first, and then we'll go to Kim. Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks, Knut. Stefan Pagacek. I'm CEO of Future for Impact. We're a learning and application platform that drives sustainable outcomes for business and impact investors. I'm calling in from Boston, and my passion for this topic has been a lifelong journey for authentic communications, both for myself and for my ventures and projects. So I'm thrilled to be here and honored to be in the company of such amazing people. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very, very much. Always lovely to have you with us, as is also the case for our next speaker, Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Schweitzer. I'm founder of Time for Change London. My background is total rewards, but I'm working with companies now to ensure that they're living their purpose and their values and creating an environment and culture that employees are proud of. I'm an ambassador and a volunteer with TTF, and I look at some of the names and think, oh, I think I've written some of these people an email on behalf of Andy recently. So welcome to everyone who I haven't met before.
Thank you very much, Kim. Kim does a wonderful job helping us manage our LinkedIn activity. Thank you, Kim. We haven't been to Robin Harries yet, have we? I don't think. Robin?
Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name's Robin. I work for a communications agency called Quiet Room, and we spend our working lives helping companies talk about complicated stuff in a clear way.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. So we're going to go to Donna. After Donna, our speaker after Donna is Robin, who's just spoke, then to Knut, and then to Chris Taylor, and then we'll have a bit of kind of free-for-all Q&A discussion, etc., etc. Remember, the overall purpose of this event is to identify for you to decide whether you want to be involved with producing the guide to authentic communications that we plan to launch in Q1 next year. I want it to be as good and compelling and convincing as possible. I want it to be a high quality piece of thought leadership designed specifically to draw the regulators, policymakers and politicians out and to coalesce around this topic of authentic comms. So can we please put our hands together to welcome our first speaker, Donna Bradshaw, who of course will be introducing herself and then she'll be sharing her thoughts. Donna, thank you very much. Can we put our hands together for Donna? Super stuff. Good. Donna, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Good evening, everybody. I recently joined TTF, volunteering with the PR and communications side. I've got quite a long background in financial services. I started in the industry in 1987, spent a lot of time in sales and then went on to spend a decade in marketing and communications, mostly external communications, but I've also got a history in internal communications, a bit of which I want to talk about this evening. During that time, I spent a lot of time working with national press, television and radio, and I also did a lot of talks to large groups of women in particular. And it was through that, it was one of the things I noticed from my experience is that the literature that is provided and what the understanding of the audience are very, very separate. And I think we can do a lot when it comes to improving the way that we sort of give out the factual information. I think we could use graphics a lot more, very simple diagrams, for example. But going back from that, sort of looking at authenticity, I want to sort of turn around. I'm going to give you a little personal story about a case that I was involved in communications, and it involved not just external, but also the internal communications in our company, of which I was a director and shareholder. And the lessons I learned from it, and the thing that I think really goes to the heart of authenticity, and that is about intent and culture. So I sort of wrote down, I've sort of written things up behind me, things to remind myself to talk to you about. It's not what you say. I don't even think it's necessarily how you say it. It's what you do as well. And what we have to do is have the action aligned with the comms. And if we can do that, I think that's where we get closer to authenticity. And particularly in this post-truth world that we're living in, you only have to look at the news or even look at our politicians to see that a lot of us can't tell when somebody is being genuine. We also can't tell when the information is correct. So within organizations, I said, what I come back to is it's not just what they're saying, but also aligning that with the action behind it. So going on from that, I've got this little story. I said I was a director and shareholder of an SME, which provided financial advice, independent financial advice, mainly for women. We had very limited budgets. We were trying to grow, and we were, our costs were relatively high. So we didn't have a lot of spare. And we basically lived and died on our reputation. I'm very proud to have worked at that company. I learned a lot. And when you've got your skin in the game, your heart and soul's in there. So for me, the customer is queen and king. Something happened that really shocked me. I got a telephone call one day. I don't know if any of you have heard of a woman called Jessica Gorst Williams. And she wrote a column in the Telegraph called Ask Jessica. Now, if you got in Ask Jessica, if you got a call from her, it wasn't a good thing. And it could be very damaging to your reputation. Now, if you're a big company, it's not so much of a problem. There's lots and lots of customers, and not every, the Telegraph, some people read, but it may not be all of your customer base. With us, the Telegraph was a big, it was a really important channel for our customer base and our reputation. So I got this call, and it was a complaint from one of our clients. And I was absolutely horrified because thankfully our company did not get complaints. We had excellent service, we had excellent advisors, we had excellent training, we also had excellent compliance. But it turned out that one of our advisors, I did have concerns over this advisor, had failed to act within a time frame, which meant that the client missed out on a tax deadline, and as a result lost a 4-figure sum. So I immediately, when I got this call, went to the file and checked, and I could see we were at fault. And this is something that goes to the heart of authenticity. Is one of the things is called ownership. We need to start owning our actions. And this is something that goes to my very core. It's like, if you're going to be authentic to anyone, you have to own what you're doing. So I looked at the case and I was like, yes, held up my hand. We made a mistake. But what horrified me was when I went to my compliance director, who actually went on to work for the FSA, which became the FCA, and we had never had a complaint. This was the thing, we had never had a complaint. So he got this complaint, And I said, why have you not dealt with this complaint? Because it had gone past the stage. The woman had gone to the FSA first, gone to our compliance director first, and he was sitting on it. And he said, oh, well, the rules say that I can respond within X time frame. And this horrified me. And I said, but that's not what we're about. We don't do things by the rules. We are the company that goes above and beyond the rules. And it wasn't as if we actually had that much to deal with. It was a very simple thing. We got the complaint in, we look at it, we deal with it. And if it's something like this where it's proved we're wrong, I said, you know, the way to sort of handle it is to act immediately. So anyway, we looked at this, I sort of investigated. I went back to Jessica and I held up my hands and I said, I'm sorry, you're right, we made a mistake. I did this all in one day. In fact, I did it within about an hour or two. I looked and I said, we're at fault. We must compensate the client for the monies lost. We also gave a little bit above and beyond. And then on top of that, I sent her a bunch of flowers. Now, the lesson this, we're sort of asking about sort of authentic communications. This was me being authentic. This was our company being authentic. As a result, Jessica said to me, she said, you know, I'm going to have to write this up. And I said, absolutely. I said, go ahead. I said, you know, we hold up our hands, you know, mea culpa. But it turned out that for once, the Jessica Investigates gave the company a glowing report. So it was like turning things around from what could have been a bad story to a good story. And I carried this with me, and when I look at companies, particularly big companies, this is something that we fall down on again and again and again. It's this not taking ownership for what we do, not acting on it immediately. And that raise questions of like, what is the culture that causes that? And I think, Andy, this is the thing that you need to get to, because unless you change the internal culture, then whatever you're communicating is largely meaningless. It's just fluff and PR and so on and so forth. But underneath all, if you're a rotten apple's a rotten apple, whatever way you look at it. And I think one of the things we do, the lesson I learned is the thing that you do with all this honest communication and action, you've got to have the action aligned with the communications, is that it's not just about being authentic, but it's good for business. It builds trust, it creates loyalty, you know, it's cheaper in the long run. I mean, for us, as I said, if we'd got a bad review, a company with very tight margins, we would lose customers. We needed to get new customers in as well to help us grow the business. So we'd saved ourselves money in the long run. It builds our brand and our reputation. And it also, if you've got good communication internally, with that, we actually sat down afterwards and I spoke to the compliance director, and we changed our timeframes for dealing with complaints, which I said, fortunately, were few and far between. But by doing that and getting those communications right, we also drive employee engagement. And as a result, that also makes a better culture for employees, and we have lower staff turnover. So that was a little, I said, an example. And I think that gets to the heart of communications. And I had a sort of summary about, you know, the type of organizational culture and the things that are important for honesty. It's going beyond the reactive, which is that top-down company, and not even the proactive, where it's about sharing of you know, flow of ideas, but getting to a stage where we also accept mistakes and we anticipate potential issues that may be detrimental to the organization. And we encourage environments where things are open and honest, and allow people to make mistakes. And when we do make mistakes, then we hold up our hands and we rectify them.
Donna, thank you very much indeed. I think you've got us off to a great start. You really have. We'll
I had more things to say, but I thought I'll tell you a story and leave the other stuff behind.
I think that captures it all so well. What's already coming across, it's been mentioned twice now. If there's something wrong with the culture of the organization, there'll be something wrong with the way the company communicates. So the communication problem is a manifestation of a deeper underlying issue. And I absolutely buy that, Donna. I absolutely do. Donna, what we'll do, we'll go around to get some comments and questions and interjections from others, and then we'll come back to you for any sort of final concluding comments before we go on to our next speaker, if that's okay. Yep. So I'm going to get myself onto gallery view so I can see everybody in one go. That's great. Please just raise your hand if you'd like to respond to anything that Donna has said, or indeed put a fresh point into the mix as well. Would anybody like to share something at this stage? Anne-Marie Borg, you're in first. Anne-Marie, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, Donna, thank you very much. I really followed that very closely, and I'm so with you there. There's something about to be accountable on an ethical level, which seems to be one of the problems that we have in creating trust. And I don't know how that accountability can actually be brought in, but I would actually see that the communication, if it's done properly, in the interest of our client or the people we are working with, means that that would definitely bring trust, and this authentic and congruent, persistent kind of consistency as well in how we actually behave. So I don't know if that adds anything, probably nothing, but that's what came to my mind when I was listening to you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I'm sure it does. Lovely. Would anybody else like to say something at this point? Let's go to Kim.
Thanks very much, Donna. I also love the point that you made about the action, because when we look across organizations today, and even with some of the organizations that signed the Business Roundtable agreement and promise, there's a lot of words out there, but there's not a lot of action. And I think that action part is really important, because without that, it's really hard to see the authenticity and to see it lived every day.
Wow, there's some really great points being made. These are exactly the kind of guiding principles that I want to end up in the guide. Thank you very much indeed, Kim. Who'd like to go next? Mr. Stefan Pakic.
So Donna, first of all, thank you for your comments. In my industry, in impact and sustainability, it's called greenwashing. And it's similar to what you talk about in terms of not being accountable, not being authentic, simply dressing up a story in which, if you peel back the layers, there's just nothing there, or there's misinformation. And unfortunately, this is hamstringing the industry's ability to attract capital, serious capital, to solve what are very, very serious problems that we're seeing in the world today, and that we will see over the next 50 years. So I'm right there with you. I think there has to be a cultural shift, a mindset, an organizational shift. I don't think this is as much about regulatory or policy as it is about behavior and about being good actors. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And we got time for one more, I think, before we go back to Donna. Michaela, I think, did you raise your hand, Michaela?
Well, communication, right? It involves the sender, the message, and the receiver. Mm-hmm. So the sender is the financial advisor, that he himself has to be very knowledgeable in order to be able to understand and explain. Unfortunately, there are still some advisors which are no more than salespeople, as we have seen in all of those bad movies, right? With the shops, hump and dump, what is dump? Stock dumping. So that is one area probably where the TTF would, how can I say, the level and the requirements in order to be a financial advisor or seller of investments. The message, I think here is lots of work for the lawyers, right? It's a lot of attention given to the way the returns are calculated and fees are justified. And as for the receiver, the investor, unfortunately, I have met people personally that came into money and they are just looking for someone to trust, and they think they shouldn't do any homework. And that's a bit their justification. They say, oh, that's why I'm paying someone. So they take this off my hands, which I think is kind of ridiculous. I mean, the public is not educated. And unfortunately, some people, I don't know, just inherit money, or they don't really care, and they somehow believe that the right person will make them and keep them rich without them making any effort.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michaela. We're going to go to Ian, then we're going to go back to Donna. Mr. Ian Beeston.
Yeah, one point that I would like to make, really, and it's really echoes what Donna said about culture, is that there's also a lot of arrogance in the industry. So I think that might be worth thinking about within the context of culture. The danger of arrogance is complacency, really. So a lot of people are really in love with their brand, or really in love with the way they do something because it's their way. But actually it often fails their policyholders because it's not their policyholders' way. So I think that might be something worth thinking about in terms of when you put that guide together. It's a culture, it's an aspect of culture, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. And I would say that there have been umpteen times, I couldn't count how many, but many, many times in my career in the financial industry where the mindset of the people writing the comms was, they probably won't understand this anyway, so it doesn't really matter how much they don't understand it, a little bit or a lot. There was that kind of arrogance in there, especially that tension between the marketing people and the legal people in the firm. Very often the marketing people will be trying to communicate a nice, clear, intelligible message. They will be trying to do that. But the legal people will say, no, if we say that, there's this implication. If we say that, there's that implication. And they end up hiding behind a kind of regulatory wall that basically ends up meaning that what gets pumped out is pretty intelligible in the first place. These are great points, folks. Thank you all very much. Let's go back to Donna for some sort of final comments before we then go to John for his session. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks, Andy. There's quite a lot of things there. One of the things that it gets to, I had slides, but I didn't put it up, was about intent. And looking at the intent, as I said, it's okay to make mistakes, and you have to create a culture where it's okay to make mistakes. On the thing about, Michaela, you said about some people, they don't make any effort to learn anything. That's their right. They're the customer. This thing about knowing your customer. And that goes on to the arrogance thing as well. A culture where, if you're being arrogant, either there's issues around rewards, there's also issues around not knowing your customer. Now, I see this as a constant, it's an ever-evolving feedback loop. You've got to understand the customer. We had a client who couldn't open her mail. She didn't want anything to do with it. She paid extra. She paid for the time so that we opened her mail and we held her hand. If there are people out there that want to do that and they've got money and they need advice, then fair enough, that's their life, that's their choice. But it's to do with, as I said, going back to the culture of the company and the way they communicate with the customer, using language that customer understands. I've had amazing conversations with a company called CX Partners in Bristol. I don't know if any of you have heard of them. They're a sort of tech company, do customer experience. They talk to the FCA a lot. And they do incredible work with direct with ordinary people, trying to, even with the last one I was on with them was about vulnerable people, and they actually found, by actually attending to the needs of the most vulnerable, they actually covered all the bases with all customers, because they were core needs and core messaging that had to be dealt with. I'll say last thing about sales. I worked in sales for 9 years, and I have to agree, there's lots of wide boys. There's a lot to do with the rewards. The thing about sales as well is that very pumped, but it doesn't have to be like that. You can change it around. For me with sales, what it was about was actually knowing my customer, knowing I was B2B sales. I went in there, found out how does that company tick? What are their ethics? Who are their customers? And providing a good service to them. It was all about, it's not about me, it's not about what's in it for me. It was the question I always ask is what's in it for them. And if you look, I think if we start from that basis, we provide much better communications and also a much better culture within an organization.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Can we please once again put our hands together for Donna? Thank you very much indeed, Donna. Super stuff. Super stuff. Thank you. And you may have remembered that Donna at the very beginning mentioned that she was helping TTF with our PR, media and comms. What you're looking at here, folks, these are the individuals who've volunteered to be part of TTF's PR, media and comms strategy group. So the group meets on the first Wednesday of the month at 9 o'clock on Zoom. We basically brainstorm ideas about how TTF can do PR, media and comms better. So Ian Fraser is a freelance journalist. He wrote Shredded, all about dodgy stuff going on in the banks. Alex Varley-Winter is a pro journalist who's also volunteered to be head of TTF's investigative reporting and media relations effort. Leslie Kerwin is a reporter, mostly with BBC, used to present stuff on TV and radio. Great radio program she did called The Transparency Detectives for Radio 4 a few years ago. We were featured in that. I'll find a link and I'll put it in the chat, make a note. Mark Bishop has got a PRE kind of background, but he's also a pretty heavy duty campaigner for reform in the scam space. Andrew Pearson's with KVPR, that's Capable Public Relations. And Murray is the comms manager at the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Fair Business Banking. Brian Basham is a almost legendary performer in the world of PR in the UK, big ticket stuff, great to have involved. Donna, you've heard from Donna just now. Julian runs his own PR firm called Liminal. Kate is a multi-capable lady who's helping TTF on many fronts. And Louise Dolan is a senior person at Camarco, the PR firm. If anybody else wants to join that group, please do. The more brains, the better. It's pretty creative. It's all about ideas. It's not about doing stuff. It's more about helping TTF to understand what it ought to be doing. That's why I thought I'd take the opportunity to share that group with you all. So Donna, once again, thank you very much. John, it seems to me that you are about to present, which is perfect. You carry on. While you're doing that, I'm going to try and get my laptop resurrected. Thanks very much, John. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robin Harries. I'm a senior writer at Quiet Room, as I said earlier. At Quiet Room, we work with businesses that have difficult, important things to talk about. Most of the time, these are financial services businesses, pension schemes, investment managers, and protection insurers. And we help our clients use language that's clear, but also resonant. So that way, customers understand what we're on about, but they also understand why it matters. I've called my 10 minutes good news for people who love bad news. It's tangentially related to what I'm going to talk about, but it's also the name of a really, really excellent album by Modest Mouse from 2004 that I think a lot of people will have forgotten by now, and it amused me. So anyway, the folks at Transparency Task Force have asked me to spend a bit of time this evening talking about the philosophy of our business at Quiet Room and how we go about tackling the big blockers that stand between financial services and more authentic communication with consumers. Now, I'm just going to frame this idea around a single example. Where are we at the moment? What do people think about the way that financial services communicate, and what's the impact on us? What's the knock-on effect? Well, at Quiet Room, we spend a lot of time collecting stories about communication and photographing health and safety notices in hotel rooms and things like that. I mean, and it's so that we can kind of compile them and save them for the next event we speak at so that we can put them on slides. Now, here's one that stuck with me. It was in the money section of The Guardian about 3 years ago now. Can everyone see that? Yes, thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, great. All right. So this is a letter from a lady called Sheila Hastings, whose critical illness insurance claim had been declined by her insurer. And as you can see, the headline was, "I had cancer, but my insurer tried to wriggle out of paying." Now, I don't think we've got anybody here who works in protection insurance, but you may still know that, as is very often the case, with these kinds of cases, it all came down to whether Sheila's condition met the degree of severity specified in her policy. So whether or not she was sick enough to sort of trigger the payment. Now, I'm not going to go into the details because we don't really have the time and because they're not actually all that relevant. What I want to do is focus on the words that Sheila used. Later on in the letter, she says, my claim was declined due to wording in the policy. Reducing my hours to cope with the ongoing tiredness had been a burden on my income, but the insurer, the name of which I've redacted, doesn't have to worry about that as they hide behind words and terminology. Now, I've worked actually with people at the insurer concerned, and I know a lot of them. And I think that like a lot of people at all insurers, they actually take quite a lot of pride in the products they offer, and they want those products to help people in difficult times. So perhaps I'm a little more towards the naive end of the scale. I don't necessarily believe that a lot of people in financial services who communicate poorly want to communicate poorly. It's just that this is the culture of the organization that they grow up in. But the language that Sheila uses, I believe, is indicative of a perception that's widely held among the financial services buying public. This perception is that words are not the means by which businesses communicate what they offer. Instead, they're one of the ways in which people who work in financial services actually take advantage of people who don't. So this is where we are. So we're Mr. Potter. We're hottest day of the year. I thought, what a great day for a Christmas film. We are Mr. Potter. So never mind getting to be George Bailey. How do we even get back to a position where we have a neutral perception of who we are and what we do? Now, the answer is, on a kind of a trite level, actually quite straightforward. So we need to make ourselves more easily understood. People don't trust something that they don't understand. That's all there is to it. But where do we start? Well, I could kind of stand here for an hour or 3 hours and talk about techniques to make writing clearer. And at Quiet Room, we run workshops that do just that. But I think that today we're looking for something a bit more systemic, a kind of a big idea. And so with the time that I've got left, I just want to share one change, I think a change in mindset, that I think that every business and everybody who works in financial services can make to be more easily understood. And we've kind of touched on this already, this kind of tension between the marketing folks and the compliance and the financial promotions folks. But writing in our industry is this kind of collaborative, I don't know if that's the right word for it, but anyway, this big iterative mess. And people from different disciplines with different skill sets try and reach a grudging compromise. And the fault line is between the good news, which is the stuff we want to tell people so that they'll buy from us, and the bad news, the stuff we have to tell people to avoid falling foul of the regulator. On the former, we say as much as we can, as prominently as we can, and on the latter, as little as we can, and wherever we can kind of squirrel it away. So what we want to do is improve the output of this kind of process. And my suggestion is that it's about mindset. And it's about the idea that we should spend more time telling people the bad news, the stuff that they need to know, but that we don't instinctively want to tell them. So is anybody here a Netflix subscriber? I mean, is anybody here not a Netflix subscriber? So in my house, we've got Netflix, Disney Plus, and Amazon Prime. And when the new season of Succession comes around in the autumn, we'll need to sign up to Now TV again as well. Now, if you have a streaming service, every so often you get an email like this. Here we are. This is from Now TV. I screenshotted this as soon as I saw it because I was absolutely delighted by it. Oh, you've made some changes. I wonder what they are. More films, a new sports package. No, but this is the email. So you've got a load of guff in the first paragraph about the latest award-winning box sets and new features. And then you've got the actual message, which is that you're putting up the price of the thing that I subscribe to. Lots and lots of businesses do this. We've reviewed your account, we've updated our prices, we're making some changes. And what this means is that we develop a heightened sensitivity to this kind of messaging. And when we see it, it's doubly annoying. Annoying because of what you're telling me, but also annoying because you're kind of being sneaky about it. And that erodes the trust that I have in you, the trust that I have in the communications you send me. So anyway, this is kind of streaming services. I want to share a more relevant example from something I was working on actually just a couple of weeks ago. I was doing a bit of work with the trustee board of a defined benefit pension scheme, and they were in a bit of a pickle because of something that had happened, something that had come up during their GMP equalization process. Now, if you know what GMP equalization is, good for you. If you don't, even better, keep it that way, because the whole thing is an absolute nightmare. Anyway, our client, however they'd found it out, had realized that they were overpaying some of their pensioners. And they were overpaying some of these people by a lot of money and had been doing it for a long time. Some of these people are retired in the 90s. Now, at the extreme end, a few people in their 70s and their 80s have been overpaid by as much as £25,000 over the course of their retirement. And the word from the scheme sponsor, the company, was really, really clear. You need to cut these people's pensions, that's the first thing, to what they should be. And you need to get back what's been overpaid. Now, if that makes you flinch, then you're not alone, because this came from the company. It made the trustee flinch, and it made us flinch at Quiet Room. When we actually had a conversation, is this something we want to be involved in? Is this a moral risk? Is this just too dirty for us? But in the end, we decided we were going to do it. And our reasoning was really simple. And it's that we didn't think anybody else would write as good a letter as we would explain this as clearly as it needed to be explained. So the substance of this letter, as I've said, is two things. A, your pension is going down, and B, we're going to recover the money that we've overpaid you by reducing your future inflationary increases, okay? So I wrote the first draft of this letter, and at the top of the letter I had a heading, and this was my heading. We've discovered that your Wonka Chocolate Factory pension plan payments are higher than they should be. I mean, just to state the obvious, I've changed the name of the client to protect their confidentiality. Our clients sadly aren't quite that glamorous. So we sent that off to the client, and they were going to review it, make some notes on it, and we were going to come back and have a review call. And this is, I mean, anybody's ever done a process like this where you send something off and it gets reviewed and commented on and sometimes blind edited. It is a tricky thing. Anyway, it came back and they had added this comment, this suggested change. Please read this letter carefully as it contains important information about your Wonka Chocolate Factory pension. And the comments on this and the reasoning behind it were really, really interesting, both on the document and on the review call with the client. People said, I don't like this. This is too blunt. I think this will frighten people. This will make people panic. Now, it's our job, as it is everyone's job at work, to know when you should dig in and when you should give ground. And I really, really dug in, up to and beyond the point of really, really annoying the client. Why did I do this? Well, in any communication, if we have any philosophies at Quiet Room, one of our philosophies is that the most important message is the thing that you should put first. So there are two reasons for this. The first is that it's better to show people something than to tell them. So if you tell me something's important, I might believe you. But if you show me what it is that's important, then you don't need to tell me. This means that I'm more likely to read the letter and more likely to act on it, more likely to respond. You know, in extremis, I could read this heading of this letter and just shred it in a fit of rage, and I'll miss a lot of detail, but I'll still get the gist. But it goes kind of beyond that, I think. I think the suggested heading is actually quite dangerous. So when you're talking about people's pensions, which are incredibly complicated things to most people, you're dealing with people who aren't experts and people who are already disinclined to read what it is you sent them. And if they read that heading and put the letter down, they might not pick it up again. And that's a really, really dangerous thing. I want to show you one more example for contrast. So here is a letter from NS&I. So I know that we have some people from outside the UK on the phone, but this is the State Bank's kind of lottery, the NS&I, and I'm a winner. Sadly, it was only £25, so I'm going to be staying at Quiet Room for at least another month. But look at the prominence of these messages. Okay, so here we have 4 times in the subject line, the pre-header, the heading, and the body copy. You've won. You're a winner. The relative prominence of these things is really, really interesting. I think, but do you think that when this email was cooked up, there were some folks at the review meeting who suggested that the headings say instead, please read this email carefully as it contains important information about your National Savings and Investment Premium Bonds account? Of course there weren't, because this is what we do in financial services. We do it all the time. So good news, the stuff we want to tell people about, product features, upgrades, these are marketing messages. And a new higher rate of interest on a savings account, especially these days, goes on a billboard at Waterloo Station. But a new lower rate of interest just goes in a letter to the people concerned. And it goes much, much further. It's a cultural thing. If you do this, we're not going to give you this. This only applies to you if you don't do that. You should have done X, but you didn't, and now we're going to do Y. So these are compliance messages. These are the other side of the fault line. They go in the terms and conditions. And sometimes they're in a different document altogether. They call it things like a key features document, I think, in investment. So nobody likes giving anyone else bad news. I get why it is that we do this. It's a flinch. So it's human nature, even if it's not our fault, what we're telling someone. If we're the messenger, we do worry about getting shot. But think again about the people you trust the most, your friends, your family, the colleagues you like. Think about young George Bailey telling Mr. Gower that he's mixed the drugs wrong. Okay, the strongest relationships are based on people telling us the things that we need to know, people who want the things that are best for us. And that's the kind of message I want to leave you with. If we want people to trust us, it's time to stop doing this thing that Sheila calls hiding behind the words, and to look at the relative prominence we're giving to what we think of as being the good stuff and the bad stuff. Now, we're the experts, and people, although they might not like us, they do depend on us to give us that information. So I think we should stop telling them only what they want to hear and start telling them what they need to know. Thanks very much.
Robin, thank you so much. That was so well got across. You lived your message. You really did articulate your thoughts so clearly and so well. That was wonderful. I enjoyed every moment of that, apart from the bit that I couldn't see because my laptop crashed. But putting that to the side, that was great. Can we please invite folks to respond, comment, question in relation to what Robin has just been talking about? We're going to go to Donna, then to Chris Taylor. Donna, you're next, then to Chris Taylor. Thank you.
Hi, Robin. I thought that was excellent. I think absolutely right about, you've got to be honest about the bad news and also say exactly what it is you're going to talk about rather than sort of beating around the bush, because that only creates more problems. Just one question on the, admitting the mistake. And one thing in that is I think that if a company's made an error, and they have to claw back the money, it's not necessarily communications, but there's an issue of compensation as well. And I think companies maybe need to look at that too and say, sometimes we have to go, okay, let's do a compromise situation. Can I ask you as well, sorry, quickly, if you come back to that as well, was that a discussion that was held when you were doing the communications?
Reaching a compromise. The pension fund was going to write off the first 500 quid. So to be fair to them, the vast majority of people who were affected were only affected up to about that amount, and all of that got written off. And then there were a bunch more people who were affected more, but the kind of the clawback was something they wouldn't have noticed all that much. So from thousands of people, these people who were being told that they owed a lot were only a small percentage, and they had the first 500 written off, but they were still going to be 5 figures out of pocket. And that was the decision that came from the scheme sponsor. So although we could communicate that decision, our ability to influence it was quite limited. Well, non-existent really.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Robin. Let's go to Mr. Chris Taylor.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, thanks, Robin. I wanted to concur basically with what you were saying, and I'll be talking quite a bit about our approach to product documents and things that we've done, not just around plain English, but around the design of them, from the pagination to the points that we emphasize on the pages. And in a 20-page product document that we have at the moment, I can tell you that the only points we've put in bold or emphasized throughout the entire document are the risks. And not just for risks, but what we call info points. So we've developed info points to put explanatory points on the page. All of it's in plain English. And to my mind, you instill confidence in your client base if you're known for doing that. If that's the hallmarks of your approach and people can see it, touch it, expect it, believe in it, then you're a long way forward from what you are if you have done the opposite. Because to my mind, more is more. The more you talk about the risks and the downside, actually, the more you put them into context and they're understood and potentially accepted.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. I've got one for you, Robin. I've got to know Quiet Room reasonably well over the last 4 or 5 years or so, and your organisation genuinely has an enthusiasm about its work. How does it make you, as an employee of Quiet Room, how does it make you feel? How does it make you work knowing that your organization has this kind of DNA that's all about trying to do the right thing, if I can be as blunt about it as that? How does that actually manifest in the way that you approach your work and your colleagues approach your work? And of course, the reason I'm asking this question is because not only does communicating well, not only is it good news for the people you're communicating to, but we as human beings get a special kick out of doing things the right way and being honest and being authentic. And it's almost like a virtuous spiral that can somehow be created. So talk to that point for me, please, Robin. How does it make you and your colleagues feel knowing that your philosophy to comms is what it is?
Interesting question. How does it make us feel? I think to us, it is, we can see the benefit for everyone concerned. So it's not, we're not a pressure group, and we're not a critic of the financial services business, the financial services industry. We genuinely believe that that financial services can benefit so much from clearer, more honest communication. And I think that people who work in financial services are sometimes worried about the risk. They see that as being something that's quite outside their comfort zone. But if you can show people examples and offer people explanations of why this is going to benefit them too, of the commercial advantage it can give them, then quite often a conversation can kind of hinge on that. So although we do see the benefit, obviously, for people buying financial communication, we do approach it as being something that has a strong benefit to the industry as well.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to go to Sue Lewis, then we'll be going to Knut, our next speaker. Sue, to you.
Thanks very much. A couple of points. First, I just challenge what Chris said. I think sometimes an overemphasis on the risk can just be butt covering on the part of whoever's doing the communicating. I agree the downsides need to be clear, but people need to balance the upsides and the downsides. And I've seen a lot of firms just put in risk after risk after risk just to cover their asses, basically. I'm not saying you do that, but it is a thing. And the point you're making, Robin, I'd love to think there was a commercial advantage to clear communication, but I'd be really interested to know what work you've done on that. And I say that because consumers are really, really sticky, and they don't choose firms necessarily on the basis of the fact that they communicate clearly. So I'd be really interested in any evidence. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'd be interested in any evidence you have. Thank you.
I wouldn't know where to start with that. When we've been in business for about 15 years, and so much of the work that we win is based on showing people case studies that show that communicating more clearly has made a big impact. If I look at something like working on complaint letters, we've halved the number of complaint letters for organizations. We've helped investment funds hold on to money that they expected to lose. We've reduced response times to letters by a quarter. I mean, I can show you kind of creds decks and things like that. But based on our evidence, we have very, very clear and persuasive metrics that show that where businesses have begun to communicate more clearly, they have had a marked increase in their engagement with customers, in their retention of customers, and in their winning of new customers.
Right. No, those are good examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, John. Can we please simultaneously thank Robin for his session, which was great, and also welcome Knut to the stage, so to speak. Thank you very much, Robin. Good man. Great job.
Very good. Very good.
Knut, over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
I'm going to sort of build off of what Robin did. Really liked his whole point of talking about the advantage of truthful communications. So the second slide, Andy, sort of sets the stage for what I'm talking about here in terms of authentic communication in a narrower and more specialized view of, is literally regarding what is it that the regulators should say regarding financial providers. And in the States over the last 20 years, the battle has been between, frankly, the broker-dealer industry on the one side and the investment advisor industry on the other side. And the broker-dealer industry has won pretty much hands down in over the last 20 years in muddling the differences between broker-dealers and investment advisors. And what this comes down to is they've muddled the difference between what they do as sales individuals, distributors, and traders whose job is to execute trades on the one side, as opposed to what it is that investment advisors do on the other side. And so, given this background, we're in a unique position right now from a regulatory point of view in the States, in that we actually have an opportunity, and what I call it, the opportunity is around a strategy that I call the truth strategy, and I can't. I'm a little frustrated because I can't see your smirks or you're rolling your eyes when I talk about truth, because that's usually in one fashion what happens because of the way the industry works. But the bottom line is that really it agrees with what we've already heard today, that research and experts do agree that ordinary investors can understand concrete ideas described in plain language and go to the next or much more important point of actually believing what is being said. And what is the unusual right now in 2021 in the States with the Securities and Exchange Commission, frankly, is that we have a 5-member commission, and we've got 3 of those 5 members who actually support the idea of that investors have rights, that investors should be protected, and that there's this thing called fiduciary that actually matters. And as I say, this is really the first time in 20 years that we've faced this situation. So if I sound too optimistic at some points, I apologize in advance for doing so. But that is the situation that we are looking at, and so what I'm going to do right now is sort of go down in the next slide what this means in terms of what does the truth strategy mean, and really it comes down to, and in some ways this may seem too simplistic and it may be too technical, because I don't have I'm constrained in terms of the wordsmithing and the language by what it is that the Securities and Exchange Commission might actually do, as opposed to the leeway that Robin has in terms of his creativity he can apply in the case study that he just talked about, or any direct company investor, company consumer communication. So what I've done here is say that if we're going to tell the truth about what is it that makes advisors different from brokers, this is really what it comes down to in terms of the advisors. There are four features, there are 4 facts that we believe that investors should know about. And again, don't look at the exact wordsmithing of it, but what is different here is that we've actually identified the 4 facts that make advisors different from brokers and represent things that we have reason to believe from research that investors care about. So when we look at investment advisors, it is the fact that they are legally fiduciaries. It is a fact that they are an advisor relationship. It is a fact that they are an agent for their clients, and it is a fact that they get paid either completely or predominantly by the clients themselves. Bingo, that is what makes up the core characteristics of an investment advisor in the States regarding the Securities Exchange Commission. Now, if we move on to broker dealers, of course, it is more complicated because broker dealers they exist and they have totally different purposes. They are held to a different standard that is lower than the fiduciary standard. There's lots of bickering here in the States about what that standard is. For this presentation, I'm calling it suitability plus, which is what one commissioner called it in the regulation BI. And then the next thing, and this may sound so simple and so straightforward, what is it that they do and what is their relationship? And they are in a sales and trading relationship, and their reason to exist is to execute trades, and that's why they do exist. And that what follows from that, which is always overlooked or ignored or concealed, is that any recommendations they actually give to an investor are solely incidental to their executing of trades or to their brokerage tasks. And then following that, it is that when they deal with manufacturers or issuers, their primary role is to offer and to sell securities, and that from that, their compensation is from trading, pricing, and sales for issuers. They are compensated for execution and not for recommendations. And this is part of the grand misconception, the grand deception that we've seen built over 20 or 40 years, frankly, where the broker dealers have been very effective at literally not saying anything about these 6 factors that I've listed here, and talking as though they were advisors themselves, legally advisors, which of course is not the case. So the bottom line in terms of authentic communication, effective communication, the approach here, and again, not the exact wording, is let's just what if we tell investors the truth? And I think that is in this respect the most powerful aspect to authenticity, frankly, just by telling them the truth. And this is not just a theory. Again, there is research that supports that the idea that when you tell investors the truth about what is it that a broker does and what it is that an advisor does, they actually understand it and they respond to it. So the bottom line in terms of the central issue when it comes to individual investors or retail investors in the United States, and now the final slide really comes down to whether the SEC is going to be willing to require disclosure that says this is what brokers do and this is what advisors do. And here is one way that we captured it a couple of years ago, and we say the relationship between 2 versus 3. If you are dealing with an investment advisor, you have a legal relationship of 2. If you're dealing with a broker dealer, you have a legal and business relationship of 3. So there is competing interests, and this image in many respects has been effective in sort of communicating that difference between the 2 relationships. So anyway, I will stop there and just say that this is something that we are working on right now. We came out with a paper and proposed disclosure a month ago. We literally had our first meetings with the Securities and Exchange Commission last week on this to urge them to do the right thing. So again, notwithstanding that, and as everybody else here knows, we are up against the most, I think of it as the most powerful interest group on the planet, we have 3 of the 5 commissioners who are actually interested in addressing this issue and seem interested in what we have to say. So I will stop there, and thank you, Andy.
Knut, thank you very much indeed. It seems like there's battle going on the other side of the Atlantic. As you know, in the UK, we introduced the Retail Distribution Review a few years ago that really helped to clarify this messy landscape that you're describing in the States. Quick question: the 2 out of the 5 who don't want this kind of thing to happen, how would they try to justify it? I mean, where on earth are they coming from, or are they just captured by lobbyists?
Well, B, they are captured by lobbyists, but you know, they've been working on this for 40 years in the modern time, and you could say they've been working on it for centuries before then to build up their whole thought process to justify what they're doing. And you know, the only thing else I will add is that, you know, it does not stand up under scrutiny, but when you have the regulators at your back, guess what? You don't have to stand up under scrutiny. And that's basically been the experience. So up until now.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's throw it open. I know that Donna just put a point in the chat. Donna, why don't you verbalize that point to Knut? So Donna, over to you. Then we'll go to anybody else that would like to make a point. Thanks, Donna.
With the brokers, because you were saying that what they really are doing is more transactional and they're not involved in the advisory side, but they're giving the impression that they also give advice, which does that allow them to charge more than they really should? So they have a perception of future value.
And they've started doing that 40 years ago, and then they started expanding that 12 years ago. So yes, and it is all pretend. They have created a pretend existence for themselves, sort of like another planet.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Knut. Would anybody else like to make a point at this stage? It looks like everyone's okay. I'll just make a very quick point here. Robin just obviously held his daughter, and I think that probably the most authentic communicators in the world are children and babies, aren't they? They don't know how to do anything other than communicate authentically, and I think that's quite lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We'll go to Steve Johnson. I think you've got your hand up, have you, Steve?
I have. I just want a brief comment.
Please do.
I'm, as I said, I'm based here in Dublin. I'm a certified financial planner, which I'm intrigued. That's actually a designation that came from the States. It's a very high level of advisory. So where do the CFPs fit in the States in relation to your debate that you're describing here?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, the CFPs using a different explanation and somewhat different language, they are clearly in the same corner as the broker dealers, and that's not surprising. 85, if you look at their membership, 3 years ago we did a survey. 85% of their members were either solely or duly registered as broker dealers. So there's no surprise.
That's fascinating. That's not the experience here in Ireland. It's very much more where we're considered the financial advisors, a holistic approach, and very much the
that's good for you. Excellent.
Agent to the client. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Knut. Anybody else? Time for one more, if there is one. If not, can we please put our hands together to simultaneously thank Knut for his session. Thank you for preparing and delivering that, and also to welcome Chris to the stage, so to speak. Thanks, Knut. Mr. Taylor, over to you, sir.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, obviously, for the opportunity to talk. The title of Andy's session today, obviously, Fixing Financial Services with Authentic Communications. My heading for my talk, championing the use of plain English. As we go through, I'm going to sort of give you an insight into what we've been trying to do as a structured product provider with plain English, and we have been at the forefront of what we've been achieving and what we've been doing, and I can talk you through how we achieved that. And one or two of you have mentioned the rub, the friction between compliance and marketing, so I can talk a little bit about that. And again, I think words that I've noticed being used quite a lot throughout this evening have been culture. And I think there's been several mentions of integrity, and you'll see that I'll lead off with integrity in a minute, but culture is absolutely key, and that will be a recurring theme and probably my main concluding point as well. And you'll also see that we've achieved what we've done by embracing an organisation in the UK known as the Plain English Campaign. And so we've been working with them for the last 5 years. I've learned an awful lot in the process. They've challenged our thinking, not just down to plain English, but also, and indeed not just plain English and the content and the wording, but punctuation. And all of that is designed to maximize the engagement of the reader with a document. And you want to engage the reader in the document so that they understand it. And there are various kind of motivations for doing that. And I wanted to try and touch on, what those motivations are and who they're for, and actually how they can align. I've been challenged over that 5 years, especially early on, by the campaign to think about words that are being used. And if you can say something more simply, then say it more simply. So I'll throw a little hand grenade in straight away, if you don't mind, Andy. Authentic communications, or plain English, calling a spade a spade. I think everyone could understand what we mean by the use of plain English. But I think there was a message on the chat board about what we meant by authentic at the start of this. So again, it's just thinking about every single word, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong to that, but it does throw up lots of interesting debate with
Chris,
colleagues and people.
I put that up, Chris. It was just from the Oxford English Dictionary. I just thought it'd be interesting to look at the word authentic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it was interesting, and I was actually interested to see how it would be defined before I saw your message. And anyway, just as I say, just a sort of a tangent point, really. I've got a few slides that I've put together. Most of them I'm going to kind of blast through and over, and some of the points on the page aren't really relevant to today. But if anyone wants a copy of the slides, I'm obviously happy to provide them. Tiny bit about us. Firstly, I'm the founder of Tempo Structured Products. We're part of a London-based asset management business with about 4 billion AUM. It's got an institutional side and a retail side, and we're the sort of startup minnow division within the last 5 years. This is a slide that I use in some of our presentations. In particular, I use it in a presentation all about our governance and compliance. And I've already mentioned that one of our mantras, in fact, our core mantra, well, in fact, there's two. Redefine in structured products firstly, that's our kind of core mantra. And the sub kind of head into that is doing the right things and doing simple well. And for any of you that know a little bit about structured products, you'll know that it's not necessarily an industry that's covered itself in glory in the last 20 years. So the notion that we're trying to do things the right way and are maybe at the forefront of governance and compliance and putting clients first in plain English might be quite surprising. But I use this integrity slide when I'm talking about our product governance quite a lot. Most of you will probably be familiar with some of the kind of expressions in here. Even when no one is watching, I think one of the key words or one of the key links to make there is even when the regulator isn't watching, because I want to talk about, why would a company be motivated to do this? And, there are various ways of thinking about that in terms of the integrity of wanting to do the job in the right way in the first place, ticking the box. But there's also the people that aren't so interested in doing things the right way, but they're the risk managers, and they might obviously have a sort of an actuarial approach to balancing up risk and return and figuring out what's the downside of not doing something the right way if you get caught, and working out, the probability of that coming home to roost, and if it comes home to roost, how much is it going to cost? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through, and I've got a couple of kind of examples to mention where I won't name firms that have been caught out for this and fined over the last 20 years. I've mentioned some of these points already. So we're, as I say, a startup company within the last 5 years. We are trying to redefine what we're doing in our sector. We are trying to sort of make our calling card doing the right things and doing simple well. The middle point in the top half of this page here is that what we've tried to do is think through a more rigorous, tighter, better, and ultimately safer approach. And in a minute, I'll talk about, safer for who and kind of who cares. What you can see immediately on the page under that is that I'm leading straight away with a client-centric approach, governance and compliance that puts investors first, that isn't the CYA approach that I think Sue had kind of mentioned. And I appreciate you weren't leveling that point at me, but this is not about CYA. This is about, a cultural interest in integrity. Secondly, having put investors first, it's about supporting the advisors. I won't go into more detail on this page or make kind of party political points on that page. So straight to this point, better and safer for who? Hopefully everybody would expect what's coming on the next page to come first, but not necessarily. But investors surely come first. So another point I wanted to make, and as we go through, you'll see how I demonstrate this, is everything's kind of circular and interwoven. So our approach to plain English or authentic comms is part of our overall governance framework, our overall product governance process. Now, first and foremost, governance frameworks for investment companies should be about designing fundamentally good investments, which is what our governance process is set out to do. But the last point on the page here that you can see, and I haven't drafted these pages specifically for today necessarily, sort of tidied them up a little bit, but these are messages that we're using day in, day out throughout our kind of 5 years of existence with professional advisors. But the last point on the page here is, firstly, having designed a good investment for investors, because our governance procedures are designed to help increase the likelihood of that happening. But secondly, we want investors to understand what they're investing in, and then they can make their own informed decision as to whether it's suitable for them or not, obviously with or without the help of professional advice. Secondly, we are working very closely with professional advisors. We don't do business, by the way, directly with the public. So we have chosen not to, partly because we think that our product area is better suited to professional advice. So we don't do any D2C. And not only that, but we don't allow any what's known as execution-only business, where there is an authorized and regulated investment firm, but they don't check suitability. All they check is appropriateness, which is a kind of middle way area. So I won't go into all the reasons, but we've chosen not to do that. So we only work with professional advisors undertaking full suitability assessments for their clients. And one of the things we want to do is design good investments in the first place, make sure that investors can understand what they're potentially going to invest in. And then secondly or thirdly, we want to help professional advisors dot the I's and cross the T's on the advice they've given. Now, why is that all, I'll just go back a slide, why is that all safer? Well, obviously, if professional advisors and providers do a good job for investors in the first place, design good investments, make sure investors understand what they're investing in, including the risks, well, that's a tick in the box in the first place, just in terms of trying to do the right things in integrity. Secondly, it's likely to minimize complaints from investors. So if investors understood what they're investing in, because the risks have been communicated clearly, they will understand those risks. They won't be able to necessarily conveniently claim later on that they didn't understand those risks. So in the first place, minimize complaints. And secondly, maximize the ability for providers and professional advisors to defend those complaints if they should arise. So first and foremost, it's about doing a good job for investors. But secondly, it is about recognizing the commercial interests of providers and professional advisors who clearly want to do a good job in the first place, but they also want to CYA themselves as well. If complaints do arise, they want to be able to defend them on legitimate grounds. And being able to point to plain English throughout will clearly help defend a complaint if a complaint was to arrive at the ombudsman, etc. If a complaint goes to the ombudsman and the provider or the professional advisor can point to a document that in some way has been accredited to be used in plain English, avoiding any jargon, and is written in language that anyone or everyone should be able to understand, it will be a lot harder for the investor, potentially selectively, because let's say that the world goes to hell in a handcart in the next 5 years, and we've got a 50% fall in the stock markets in the next 5 years. In an ambulance chasing claims culture, there will inevitably be claimants. But much harder for an investor to go to the ombudsman and say that they didn't understand a document if the professional advisor and the provider can point to the original plan documentation and it's independently accredited to have been using language that anyone should have been able to understand. So I'll come on to that in a bit more detail and show you more about that as we go through. I'm not going to touch on this page too much at all, but if you look up at the top right-hand corner, all I really wanted to make the point of is that our approach to plain English is deeply embedded within everything that we're doing. That's really the only point I wanted to make on this page. So, we're trying to do 4 things differently, these four circles in the middle. And within the top one, in the middle of it, is our approach to plain English. So this is really important to us, sort of something we're passionate about. Again, I won't make too many points on all of these pages. In the middle, I've already said this, it's first and foremost client-centric. Secondly, we think it's best for the advisor firms we work with. But the third point might be more surprising and worthwhile drawing attention to. We think we can get competitive advantage from being known to be trying to do the right things and to raise the industry bar. And at the bottom, it's going to be a rare professional advisor who says that they're not interested in the cultural integrity of the firms that they deal with. So we're very much on the same page if we try to align with advisors and talk about this. Again, a point I've heard a couple of times through this evening is that there's this rub between compliance and marketing. I don't see that at all. I'm aware of it, but I personally don't see it. I think compliance people and marketing people can both be appeased and satisfied by the right approach to this. Compliance people who think that legal regulatory wording drafted by a lawyer covers their asses are completely wrong. It absolutely will not. It increasingly will not, because the ombudsman will just throw it out. The regulator will throw it out for, being gobbledygook, basically. The legal and regulatory advisors need to recognize that this has to become about client-centric integrity done the right way, and both people will be happy, both compliance and marketing, if that can be achieved. Again, just a general point on this page, rather than going into all the detail of it, but we absolutely think it's a very joined up affair in order to drive the best possible outcomes for investors ultimately. So everyone in the food chain, from the manufacturing end to the distribution advice end, needs to share these kind of principles and interests and be joined up in them and collaborate and support each other. Got a couple of slides now to come on to a little bit more detail about what we've done and how we're doing it. 5 years ago, when we set out to establish this company, we needed to talk to legal and regulatory advisors. So we beauty paraded the obvious firms. For any of you that are familiar with Simmons & Simmons, you'll know that they're one of the go-to firms, but the other firms would have included the likes of Clifford Chance, Allen & Overy. And what we were saying to these firms was that we wanted them to do their very best, or basically do their very worst, in telling us absolutely everything that we could possibly need to consider from a legal and regs perspective. But we also told the firms in the beauty parade that when we had got this from them, that we would take all of our investor-facing product documents and we would give it to the Plain English campaign, and we would ask them to rip out all of the jargon. We would then go back to the legal and regulatory advisors who would have to sign off on it. And if they didn't think they could work with us on that basis, then we didn't think we could work with them. So we set that out 5 years ago with Simmons & Simmons, and we went through that process. And we had an incredibly rigorous approach with the Plain English campaign to looking at what we were doing. We basically developed 4 product brochures for 4 different plans. Each of those brochures is about 20, 24 pages long, typically, including terms and conditions and the the important points, as well as the marketing kind of positioning. This particular fact will sound the wrong way. It'll sound worse than it is and more onerous than it is, but I'll tell you anyway. It took 400 drafts to get those 4 brochures finished, but I'll explain that we called an iteration of those brochures potentially a single word change. So 400 to-ins and throw-ins between Plain English campaign, graphic designer and legal advisors. And the end result was we got 4 plan brochures that we thought are very well written. In terms of a number of things, at the bottom half of the page here, what I've highlighted is it's not just about the content and the language being used, but we've also thought about the way the document presents, including the pagination and layout, what bits face each other, whether someone's going to receive a hard copy or be emailed a hard copy. If they email it, if they receive it by email, are they going to print it double-sided or single-sided? How will the document appear in their hand? And we've looked at the readability and the kind of reader experience and how much a person engages with a document. And we've looked at ways to try and improve the engagement with a document through design as well as content. I'll talk a little bit about some of the content points in a minute. So on our pages, we've used standout circles to emphasize potentially sort of marketing points. And I already said earlier on that we've used what we've called info points with a very clear kind of eye icon on the page to position a risk, and not just a risk, but an explanatory point. So we've tried to be educational within our documents. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about how we've turned the 24-page document into a single page if-then summary. And in a single table in 5 rows that's color-coded, we've basically managed to summarize all of the key risks, well, the features firstly, the features for risks and the outcomes using color so that all the risks are in red, etc.
Chris,
we're working.
Excuse me, Chris, if I could ask you to bring your session to a close in sort of 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, apologies. I'll fly through, Andy. So let me leave it at that on that page, other than to say some of the things that the Plain English campaign commented on were quite interesting. We clearly distilled any technical jargon down to simple language. So as an example of that, we call capital money, a very basic example. In my industry, there's lots of jargon, lots of terminology, such as a strike date being the first date of the investment term. Well, we've abandoned strike date and called it start date, etc., etc. Capital letters was an interesting one. The Plain English campaign's advice was that too many capitalized terms interfere with the reading experience of a document and put a reader off, whatever the industry or type of document. And my industry is littered with defined terms, all of which are typically capitalized. So every paragraph of a document has, numerous capital letters. So we minimized our defined terms so we could minimize our use of capital letters. And instead we went with defined terms plus a glossary. I'll gloss over some of these pages just to finish, but these are specific points to my industry where we've paid attention to how clear we are about what we're doing. A little bit about the Plain English campaign in here, if any of you aren't familiar with it. There are a few organizations around like this. They're all typically quite kind of small and niche. We've definitely found Plain English campaign to be very useful to work with. Our investor-facing documents have been individually scrutinized by them right down to punctuation, and they've then been crystal mark accredited by them to say that they are approved as being jargon-free and using language that everyone should be able to understand. It's just an example of some of the documents here. So the plan brochures on the left-hand side, typically 20, 24 pages long. The if-then summaries in the middle there, you're actually looking at the entire document. And what you can see in those 5 rows is a summary of the 20-page document with the risks in red. And on the right-hand side, we've helped the advisors kind of dot the I's and cross the T's on their advice with inputs to the suitability letters that they have to provide to their clients under regulations. We've called it an input, not a template, because the regulator expects them to be bespoke, but we've provided wording. That document, by the way, is about 10 pages long, covers everything from what is a structured product, why you recommend in a structured product, what is portfolio diversification all about, including complex areas such as what is a global systemically important bank, what is a GSIB, all of which is accredited to be jargon-free. I'll pass on to the conclusion, and I'll jump through this in the interests of finishing swiftly, down to the bottom, really. I do think that this is cultural, and it is cultural at an industry level, at an individual company level, and actually companies are clearly made up of individuals, so it's down to the individuals in the companies wanting to be part of this, wanting to drive it. And all of those kind of layers, industry, companies, individuals, they have to want to be part of the change that's needed. The regulator's trying to show some teeth around this, but it has been for a while. It's not achieving very much, frankly. People aren't taking much notice, even though the regulator in the UK has been telling asset managers to get rid of jargon for several years now. Very few are doing it. So the companies and the individuals have to be motivated to want to do this, to want to be part of it, recognizing that what is best and what is good for clients will also be good for the companies. I will leave it at that. I hope that was helpful.
A lot of ground there pretty efficiently. Thank you very much indeed. Let's now throw it open. I'd like to make a comment either directly in relation to what Chris has been talking about, or indeed feel free to take the conversation in a different direction if you'd like to. Let's go to Mr. Ian Veach first of all. Ian, thank you.
Listen, thanks for that. I think it's quite interesting that, you know, the plain English campaign and crystal marking seems to be something that definitely I was talking about and the industry was talking about 12, 13 years ago when I was a marketing director, and it always seems to be just about to take off, but never quite getting there. So there's probably a discussion on that one. I think I was sort of interested in there's a how you say it and also the how much you say. And I think my sort of feeling all the way along times, and particularly from a regulatory perspective, regulators would love us to explain to our customers in detail how our various products work. Where in most other parts of life, we don't really understand how the things we use work in that sort of detail. What we understand is how we use them. You know, so said the user guide. I don't have something in my car explaining exactly how the engine works. It's a mystery to me, but I have something I know. And I hit certain buttons at certain times, and it will do what it happens. And when it's not going right, you know, you also know what to do. And maybe you're trying to, and then so by including this big massive document just means no matter how clear it is, everything gets lost. And for most people who don't want to be financial services experts, you know, their solution is not to look at it until something goes wrong, and when something goes wrong, it's probably too late. So is your if-then document almost trying to get around that by giving that sort of simplified, here's what you really need to know to use it, and you can sort of ignore everything else?
No, is the simple answer. So they very much work hand in hand. And as I remember, we're doing this all hand in hand as well with professional advisors, not direct to investors. The plan brochure isn't full of kind of technical detail that isn't of interest or use to anyone. So obviously, this is what I meant by the importance of considering the overall design, the balance, the weight of a document. Is it interesting? Will it engage? Is it just going to turn someone off? So all of those soft points have to be considered other than just the legal points. So we've got the kind of middle level plan document, which does a good job of explaining and positioning everything. And then obviously the very, very succinct at a glance, if then summary, and the two work hand in hand.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the question as well. Let's go to Sue Lewis, then to Ian Beeston. Sue.
Thanks. I don't mean to sound facetious, but I kind of looked at the front of those documents. I couldn't see them very well on the screen, but the thing that caught my eye was a kick-out plan.
Yes.
Now, I do not have I don't really know what a structured product is, but but I certainly don't know what a kick-out plan is. That does not pass my definition of plain English.
Bear in mind, firstly, that we're positioning this for professional advised investors, and our target audience, our target market, which is a regulatory requirement, is defined as people that have, you know, relevant experience and relevant kind of portfolio backgrounds.
Sophisticated investors.
Not sophisticated, specifically professionally advised investors. So this is eligible for anyone, you know, from a starting point ISA through to a pension fund, and it can be invested in by companies and corporates.
So is this designed for all normal people?
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if I can make that any bigger particularly easily, just to show you a little bit.
It looks like long kick-out plan.
Yeah, indeed. So
well, it doesn't look like kick actually, but
no, it is a kick out. It is a kick out plan.
It looks like it's not. So
no, it is a kick out plan. So basically, it's a product that's been designed with a maximum term of 10 years that can kick out or mature early at any anniversary during the term, based on certain kind of stock market conditions. It's a very well known plan within my industry, i.e. the structured products world.
Thank you.
Well, okay, no point taken. It's a term that's synonymous with this type of product within my sector that's very well recognized and understood by the target audience.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Ian.
I shan't be buying any of these babies, I'm afraid.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Ian Beeston. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, I'd just like to make the point that I think for a communication to be authentic, it needs to be tested in terms of how engaging it is to the end user, which could be a reader or a viewer. And one of the things that we need to think about is the motivation of the reader or the viewer. So in some something like Chris is talking about, where talking about a person with professional advice, the vast majority of people don't have professional advice, and for example, as a consequence of pension freedoms, are forced into having to make a very, very complex decision where they may need to trade off things like their longevity, which they have very little idea about, against a guaranteed income or a flexible income. So some very, very complex things. And unless they're motivated, they're not actually going to engage in authentic communications, because they don't have the motivation. And I think that's a real challenge, the lack of motivation. I think there are things you can do about it, but I think it's just something else to the recipient of the communication.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much indeed. Can we ask Chris, are there any sort of final points you'd like to make, Chris, before we wrap up your session and start to bring the event to a close? Any final brief points, please, Chris?
I guess some of what I've had to incorporate within what I do is regulatorily prescribed. So there is clearly consideration of that. And I think we've done a pretty good job of blending that with, the audience of people who will be reading it and receiving it. So I think we've got a good middle ground. And I'm happy to share sort of documents with anyone if anyone wants to see more detail on them.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. Let's show our appreciation to Chris, please. Please do put your hands together. Thank you very much. And I was really fascinated to learn a lot more about the Plain English campaign that I knew before the session, Chris. So that was particularly interesting. I'm wondering what sort of penetration they've had into the financial services sector as a whole. I doubt it would be very high. So it's great that you're doing the work that you've been doing with them. Thank you, Chris, very much. We're going to be bringing things to a close shortly. I'm going to recap on some of the key messages from this session. It seems to me that there's a degree of consensus around the idea that that good, authentic communications requires good, authentic cultures within organizations. So we're not in any way underestimating the size of the task here. A company that's got a pretty toxic, non-client-centric mindset is never going to communicate well and authentically, because they frankly don't want to. They'd rather carry on misleading and doing the kind of things that they do. So that goes without saying. We are planning to produce our guide. We'll be looking to launch it in Q1 next year. In the notes that you get circulated tomorrow, please do opt in if you want to tell us you want to be involved in helping to write that guide. That would be super. We need all the help we can get. It will be a team effort, and if you're inclined to help with that, that would be great. Also, I mentioned in the chat earlier that we are looking for other volunteers for our first Wednesday of the month session at 10 a.m. UK time for TTF's PR, Media and Comms strategy group, which is all about helping TTF to actually do PR, media and comms better. So those are my kind of final points, but let's go to anybody that would like to make a fresh point before we start bringing the session to a close. If anybody would like to say something, please take your chance now. Mr. Nigel Cairns, please do make your point. Thank you. You might be on mute there, Nigel.
Okay.
Yep.
Good evening. Yes, I thought the work of the speakers, and particularly Chris at the end, it's obviously exemplary what they're trying to do. Right at the end, Chris sort of dropped in the comment that the big challenge or difficulty was getting the clients to actually engage with what they were wanting to do, and surely that's the elephant in the room here. That it's all about firms that have for many, many years been profiting from deception and doing precisely the opposite of what they're now trying to be shown that's going to improve their businesses. And I think the lawyers aren't going to be very keen on this sort of approach either, because clearly it's going to cut down on their fees that they've been relying on for so long in suggesting wording in documents and contracts and all the communications that financial firms put out.
I think that's a very reasonable point to make. There's a lot more money in complexity and confusion than there is in simplicity and clarity. Unfortunately, that's really true. I see Sue Lewis nodding her head there. And this actually takes the conversation to, I guess, the final point. When setting the scene for today's event, I kind of made the point that there really is a need for the financial industry to behave itself better. And some of you would have seen this many times before. As you know, I'm pretty keen on Violation Tracker. It's a database showing the amount of infringements against US authorities. And if you click on industry totals, you get to this rather worrying table. What it shows is that the financial services sector has been fined 332 billion 924,888,663 dollars since the year 2000, a total of 6,731 records. Now, these are ginormous figures, but just to really kind of put this into context, that figure there, 332 billion, is roughly half of the total addition of all of these other industries, pharmaceuticals, oil and gas, motor, etc., etc., etc. Roughly half of the bad stuff done is directly attributable to the financial services industry. And that's why I believe there's reason to be confident to suggest that there's something particularly bad going on within the financial services sector. And I guess I'm making the point that it follows that that if the industry is that bad at behaving itself, it's probably quite bad at actually communicating as well. And I think that's the basis upon which we've run tonight's session. I'd like to thank everybody very, very much indeed for participating. Please do get involved in the guide. If you think you can help us write it, that would be great. If you've got any thought leadership that you'd like to share, that'd be wonderful. Does anybody have anything they're itching to say before we bring today's TTF meeting to a close?
I'll just make a couple of quick points. I've been talking about what we've been doing for the last 3 to 5 years in the UK. And I've been really surprised that none of my peer group competitors have followed. None of them have thought that it's a worthwhile USP. I really thought that once I put my sort of cards on the table and showed them that this could be done and that it's an attractive USP, which is the feedback we're getting, that we would be followed, but nobody has. The appetite for it is quite low. It's potentially a little bit hard to de-jargon a document, but it's clearly doable. I also just wanted to make one last point, which was I said I'd give a couple of examples, but unnamed. But I noticed one of the major UK banks a couple of weeks ago got fined £100 million for documents not being clear, fair, and not misleading. That same institution, I remember, was fined a similar amount, about £100, 20 years ago for pretty much the same thing. So the interest or the appetite to learn does seem to be quite low, which is why I think it has to come from within. I don't think the regulator with their whip or their stick is going to achieve this.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of sense in what you're saying. I think it was Lloyd's, wasn't it? Lloyd's were done for misleading comms in relation to insurance premium renewals. What they were basically doing was not offering good value for money to the existing client bank. They got fined heavily for it, quite rightly so. Thank you, Chris. Sue, to you. Sue Lewis?
It's a sort of cheeky little challenge here. I quite often say this at these sorts of events. So I've got a small to medium-sized pension pot, which is sitting in cash at the moment. I will happily invest it if someone can explain a good deal to me and exactly what I'm paying and exactly what I'm getting. Nobody has risen to that challenge yet.
Okay.
I'll be happy to do it tomorrow, Sue.
Go for it, Knut. Go for
Andy,
it.
I meant to mention this before about examples of what happens when you use clear language. Vanguard in the States came to where it is by index funds. Part of the untold story, frankly, is Jack Bogle was a fervent believer in clear, plain language, and he doesn't get enough credit for that. But anyway, that's the key point. So if you want an example of someone, but the other piece of that, of course, is none of the other firms really followed Vanguard. So that's the bad side as well as the good side. Anyway, I just want to throw that in.
That's a very, very valid point. Thank you very much indeed. Would anybody else like to make a point or indeed volunteer to pick up on Sue's challenge? I mean, surely it can't be that hard to find a product that could be explained clearly and win Sue Lewis's business. We should make it to a TTF competition. Donna Bradshaw, over to you.
I think before you even get to the product, you have to ask how long you're investing for and what you hope to achieve, and then you can look at the product. That's that would be my first question, and then we can go on to which
I can tell you all that without any I can tell you
it's the most important. It's the most important question. Otherwise,
yes, absolutely. No, absolutely right.
You could be doing something very, very dangerous, and you could lose a lot of money.
I can do all that very, very, very easily. Tell you my risk appetite. I can tell you my horizon. I can tell you exactly what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Well, the opacity of the investments is another issue, and I have issues around index funds as well, because I think that economically they have some really big systemic risks that we're facing, and the money moved up the food chain.
But Donna, that leads you to the question of rocks and hard places, because if that's your view on index, where do you go from there? And there's no such well, I think one of the points of sanity is that there's no such thing as a perfect investment, and that you've just got to understand whichever investment it is, risk and return, and whether it's suitable for an individual.
It's not the investment, it's the businesses, because the way the investment industry has changed has actually taken away from good business. It's all about this profit, and that is a dangerous way to go, because the money moves up the chain. As we've seen, we've got wealth inequality, etc. And actually what we should be looking at underlying every investment is what's underlying it, what are the businesses run well, and looking at longer terms, because everything got very short term and higher returns and very competitive, and that isn't the way the world should work. We need a whole rethink. If you talk to younger people, they think really differently, and there is going to be a shift. I think a lot of the trouble in the world is around this, because people don't like having what they've got taken away from them. There's big questions.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sue. So, in all seriousness, if you want to give me a paragraph that basically says, "I'm Sue Lewis, and I'd like to talk to somebody who thinks they can sell me a pensions investment product, that as long as they can explain it properly, I'll put it in the Transparency Times," and you never know, you might get one or two people replying to it. Up to you, Sue. Up to you. Thank you very much indeed. What a wonderful idea.
I get enough junk mail, I think, Andy. Thanks for the offer.
You put that in very, very plain English. I love that. Thank you very much indeed. You get enough junk mail. Nice one. Folks, it's been a pleasure as always to be with you for the last couple of hours or so. Thank you very much indeed, particularly to our speakers, but to everybody else for being here and sharing ideas. I'm hoping we end up producing a really good quality guide. We've done it a few times before. I know we've got the capability of doing it again. And let's use the guide to initiate and stimulate some worthwhile conversation with the powers that be, whoever they are. Thanks, folks. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.